We've just kicked into the afternoon, so I'll say good afternoon, and we shall pick up where we left off. Now, just as we're easing back from our break, I thought I'd share with you a story. The theme continues, understanding these changing times, understanding the emerging trends, but the subheading now, let's effectively connect and communicate with our culture and our community. And so the goal is for application. I thought I'd start off with a story I heard about a guy who didn't quite get the difference between information, which just ever remains theoretical, and real understanding, which can be applied. And this guy was, of all people, Albert Einstein's chauffeur. Now, we all know the great Einstein, the great physicist, but you may not know that despite his many skills and his great intelligence, he didn't actually drive. He had a chauffeur that would take him from place to place. And on one occasion, they were doing a series of, Einstein was speaking at different university theatres, and the chauffeur would take him from place to place, which was fine. But Einstein was delivering the same speech at each of these universities, which also didn't matter, except for the poor chauffeur who would have to drive Einstein there. He'd have to sit up the back of the theatre until the speech ended, and then he'd take him to the next place. And so they're driving along, and the chauffeur says, "Albert, that's an excellent speech that you've got, but I've heard it now more than a dozen times. I've actually memorised it. And I was just thinking that if you got sick one time and couldn't do it, I reckon I could stand in your place and do a pretty good job." Well, Einstein, he was always the creative thinker. He said, "Hey, why don't we try that out this next campus this afternoon? We'll just give it a whirl, see how we go." So they arrive, they park out the back, and they agree to this. So the chauffeur, pretends he's Einstein, glass on the end of nose, comes out to give the speech. Meanwhile, Einstein, dresses like a chauffeur with the jacket and cap, sits up the back of the lecture theatre to listen to how it goes. And so it rolls along, and the guy gets out and he delivers Einstein's speech, and he does a really good job. Indeed, he has memorised it. But they didn't plan on what happened next, and that is that he got it done with about 10 minutes left. And so the moderator of the session came up and said, "Thank you, we've got about 10 minutes for questions now, if you wouldn't mind." And they just hadn't planned this out. And the guy in the front row asked a fairly arrogant question about quantum physics and the theory of relativity. Well, of course, this guy's got no idea, but he looks at him, and particularly the manner in which the question was asked. He said, "You know what, sir, that question that you've just asked me, it's such a simple question that I'm going to let my chauffeur at the back of the room answer it for me." That's a pretty good response, and put the guy in his place as well, solved it all. Great thinking. However, it does highlight someone who knew the speech but had no idea what it all meant. And we don't want to be like that when it comes to understanding the trends in our community and our culture. And so hopefully in this session we can bring it to some application. Hopefully, even as I'm talking about these changes and trends, you're sitting there and joining the dots thinking, what does this mean to me? How can I engage and connect and respond to these realities? It's my job, in a sense, to point out some of the contours, to take you on the guided tour and point out some of the changes, to give a bit more visibility of this time, this culture in which we're living. And you can join the dots on that and respond to it effectively. We've said, I just finished off by discussing the emerging generations that truly are the world's first global generation. That book I mentioned that I wrote last year, The ABC of XYZ, I've subtitled it, Understanding the Global Generations, because never before have we had a generation as globally connected, not just through technology, but even the pop culture, the movies, the TV shows, the fashions, the foods, the brands. They have gone global in this generation for this cohort of global young people. They're not only global, but they're digital, the tools that they have, and therefore how they access information. They're a few clicks away from any piece of information on the planet. They carry these devices that have access to 1 million apps and just one button. It's amazing. And they apparently can be used for phone calls, although no one really uses them for phone calls. But they've got that capacity, apparently. But it's a digital world, and the connectivity of that is amazing. It's a social world, and so the influences are not just what the experts tell them, not just what the authority figures say, but the peer groups, the influence of the friends and what others are saying. It's an eatability.com type era. It's a tripadvisor.com. We're influenced by these random strangers even more, perhaps, than we are by the traditional authority channels in our world. It's that sort of environment. It's a mobile generation in terms of lifestyle, in terms of where they'll work and where they will live. A borderless opportunity for this generation today. They're visual in terms of how they consume content. And that's why the artist can often identify the trends quicker than the analyst, quicker than the scientist. That's why I think being as part of a church and a movement that is so influenced by the arts and culture and sport, you pick up on these trends, and that's essential. And in a visual era, it's not just the written word, it's not just the data, it's the symbols, it's the stories, it's the pictures, it's the images that influence this generation. The number one search engine for Generation Z, if you look at total searches and search time, is no longer Google, it's YouTube. There are more searches within YouTube because they don't want to read an article about something, they want to watch a video on something. That's the literacy of today, the video literacy and the visual literacy, and that's how they process content. And I think we are living in an amazing time. In fact, it reminds me of wise Mordecai's words. Remember in Esther? And his young cousin had that amazing position as queen. And she knew she had to stand up for her nation. But she was wavering because there was a lot of risk with her reputation and role if she were to step out. And wise cousin Mordecai said to her, Esther, for such a time as this, you've been put in that place at this time with that position. It's not an option for you not to step out, you have to. And so do we for such a time as this. You know, the Apostle Paul had great skills, but I bet he would have struggled on Twitter. And King David had some mighty skills and could write some good psalms and pretty good on a harp. Probably had no idea how to Facebook and post pictures on social media. We have those tools and opportunities. We have the opportunity in this era to do what they couldn't do, and they can't do, and they haven't been called by God to do, but you have been and have been given the tools for such a time as this. And not only that, I mean, in all of the eras to be living, God has placed you in this 21st century to not just critique the culture, but to redeem the culture and to use the very best of this culture and the tools that we have for kingdom purposes, but not only for such a time as this, but for such a place as this. I mean, of all of the places we get to be living, it's in this great land down under. I mean, what a place this is. Edward de Bono was the guy who invented the term lateral thinking. He's this professor of thinking, and no doubt you've heard something of him or his books. He's quite the influential thought leader in this world and has been for half a century. And he was once asked, well, Dr. de Bono, with all your knowledge and your understanding of things, if you were to invent the world's perfect country, the world's best country, where would it be? What would be some of the parameters there? He said, well, you'd want it in a temperate climate somewhere in the world because, you don't want it too cold or too hot just for agricultural reasons. You'd make it, where it's got a good resource base so that it can be self-sustaining. Probably an island nation works better than a nation part of a larger continent. You'd want it English-speaking because that's the language of trade and education in our world. You'd want a strong educated base. You'd want to make this nation not upwards of 50 million because that's too many, but not below 10 million because that's too few. Probably 20, 30 million might be about right. And you'd want it where the people are, where it's got a youngish population, where they're innovative and adaptive, and where their economy is agrarian. They've got the agriculture and the mines, but also formally educated and can be influencers in the world. And he said, we don't have to imagine it because there's a nation called Australia that identifies much of that. That's fascinating, isn't it? And I think we sometimes take this place for granted and this place that we have. When in Jeremiah, when the Israelites were in slavery and they were where they were living, they were thinking, well, this isn't our home, we're pilgrims, we're just passing through, so let's not worry about living here, let's just focus on where we're going to be. And sometimes Christians can have that mindset as well, we're just passing through, we're just pilgrims, so let's focus on the eternal domain. Of course that matters, but what the word through the prophet that came to the people at the time in Jeremiah 29 is, no, don't start thinking like that. Don't start thinking about the place to come. Build houses and settle down and plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters. You're going to be here for a while, they were told. Don't neglect Babylon and reject it. And it goes on to say in the passage, and also seek the peace and prosperity of this city, to which I have carried you into exile. And pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. God's placed us in a place, in a real part of his world, for a purpose. And we ought not think that we're not engaged in the culture. We have to engage and shape and influence the culture for such a time as this and for such a place as this, and I think for such an opportunity as this. I was putting up the 61% earlier of people that tick Christianity. I talked about the 15% that go to church, and we sometimes think, oh, well, it used to be higher and now it's not as good. I think one day we'll look back when it's in the minority, when it's less than half tick Christianity, when it's single digits that go to church, and we'll say, why didn't we do more when we still had such warm terrain in which we operate? Why weren't we more active back then? Maybe kids or grandkids would say, back in your day, it was 61% ticked Christianity. Now we're down to low digits. Well, what did you guys get up to back then, And I think it is an amazing opportunity that we can operate freely in this country and with such warmth in this terrain in which we operate, where the church can run theatre companies and sports groups and have an influence and assist this community in such a time of need. It's an amazing blessing we have. I was looking at the National Church Life Survey data, looking at when people came to faith. And it shows that the majority of those who sit in the pews made their first faith decision when they were young. In fact, this is all of the churches involved. And there's a number of churches where, maybe the mindset is, oh, when did I become a Christian? I was born, in an Orthodox church or Catholic church. I've always been, Christian. So I just took those churches out that have a decision theology, evangelical church where we preach the gospel and people respond. Even there, when you take all of those in a mainstream Protestant church, when they came to faith, you can see there more than 4 in 5, right on 4 in 5, made their first decision for Christ before the age of 20. And so we've got this opportunity with this next generation to connect, because that's when mainly people do. 3 in 4 of the population are aged over 20, yet 4 in 5 first conversions occur age under 20. That's the reality. Now, the bulk of the population is over 20, so we've got some great opportunities there. But let's think of the younger generations as well as the older generations and make sure we can effectively connect. Look at who influenced these faith decisions. Again, from the National Church Life Survey data there. Who were the most significant people to show you what faith was all about? Mum and dad there, number 1 and 2. And then a minister, a pastor, a priest, and then religious education, chaplain or someone in the school there, grandparents, spouse, youth group leaders, peers, Sunday school teachers. So many people have had an influence. But particularly if you look at the bigger ones up the top there, they're people influencing us when we're in our younger years. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. And I think we are in times of great change and turmoil and challenge, and I think we ought be effective with this emerging generation and connect with them. But keep in mind, in a time of aging population, the vast bulk of our population have probably not had good connection with Christianity, and there are opportunities there as well. With this question, who or what has most influenced your perceptions and opinions of Christians and Christianity? And parents and family in those formative years have the biggest impact. But number 2 now, mass media and social media. And not every parent has had a positive experience of Christianity or is connected there, and therefore that number 1 influence is not always going to be positive towards the next generation of today. We've got the opportunity to step out there with item number 2 and help shape the culture, not disengage from it, but actually take it and transform it. Networks and relationships have a big impact there as well. So I want to talk for a little while about technology and how in this time of great technological integration, we can use technology, understand these times, and so respond effectively with this community in this time and place and with this even technology. It was less than 10 years ago that I think the technology that we take for granted today first emerged. We take social media for granted. Exactly 10 years ago, Facebook had not gone public. It was still just being used around Harvard dorm rooms and a few other unis. And yet, if social media sites were countries, based on the number of active accounts, just look at populations, then Facebook would be the largest country in the world. More people in that land of Facebook than even people in that big nation of China. And that's in less than a decade. That's how many people have come on board that platform of Facebook. Even sites like Twitter would be twice the size of what is country number 3, the US, which would be pushed down to country number 5 if social media sites were countries. And new sites like Instagram would round out the top 10. That's amazing, these new platforms, the speed of change there. And in the land of Instagram, a lot of people take photos of their lunch and food and send around. That's probably what takes place. In fact, I thought this guy summed it up pretty well. Instagram is down, just describe your lunch to me, So I still personally haven't quite found the niche for Instagram, but I'm sure some of you Gen Ys and Gen Zs are more across it than I am. And that's the point, that we need a multi-generational approach to understand these technologies and to engage with them. Now, if you look at the youngest generation and the labels that get used to describe them, the generation born since the mid-90s, those of you in your teens and hitting your early 20s, Generation Z, they're often called screenagers and the iGen and the dot-com kids and Generation Gamers because technology has been core to, indeed, their formative years. But lately I've been looking at some of the labels given to the older generations, and I'm starting to see technology even there. If you look at the median age of someone on some of the social media sites, it's not in the young 20s, it's in the late 30s, and some have a median age of engagement even into the early 40s. Generation old. So get on board if you're not already. And it's never too late, because I saw an article describing the retirees of today as retired and wired, or techno grannies, or Skyping seniors, or silver surfers, or Googling grandparents. We've got a few in the room, so probably sending out tweets using the @innovate hashtag as we speak, no doubt. It's a generation where the technologies are intuitive and they're touch, and you don't need a whole history in using them. They're just very straightforward to use. And so young and old, we see generations engaged in the new platforms and the new technologies, which bridges the generation gap and creates great opportunities. So when it comes to the technology and the transformation it has in our society, it's not who is using it that is the interesting question, because pretty much everyone is. And it's not what technology they're using that's interesting, because we're using whatever the latest is. And when the new tool comes along, we get rid of that, we pick up the latest one, or the new app, we engage with that. We're used to updating and upgrading and adapting. That's just how it is. The interesting question is not the who or the what, but the how the use of technology has transformed us from a mindset and attitude and engagement perspective. And I think this helps us understand something of our culture if we look at the impact of technology in the last decade on how we think and reason. We've entered the great screen age, where these screens have a big impact. And sometimes the screens do something that we weren't expecting. For a while, the screens were just getting smaller and smaller. And recently, I think this guy picked up on the trend. For some bizarre reason, they're getting bigger. The emergence of the phablet, as it's been called, the phone tablet sort of mid-sized thing. But nonetheless, that's the reality. And whether they end up going smaller once more or remain big is yet to be seen. But one thing we know is we're spending more time on the screens. It was Sigmund a few years ago who identified that we now spend far more hours per day on screen time than on face-to-face time. In fact, you have to go all the way back to 1997 to find the last year where that traditional social interaction was greater in hours per day than screen time. These days, the screen time outdoes the face time by a long way. That's the gap, that's the screen age generation, that's the era of today. And I want to share three concepts that have flowed from this screen age and this technological saturation. Firstly, it has made us post-linear. By that I mean that we don't tend to think in linear sequential ways anymore. Technology is often called a disruptive medium because it disrupts the normal patterns and pathways and processes and sequences. It has leverage, asymmetrical power as it's been called, where one person with a tweet can sort of get straight to the boss or influence that, or a few people start sending things around and through social movement changes a company and their direction or causes them to pull this or change that. That is the power of the technology in a post-linear environment. I mean, just think about how quickly the landscape in the business world has been transformed. The biggest provider of accommodation services, hotel beds in the world today is not the Hilton Hotel or a core group that have had 50 or 60 years building their brand, but it's Airbnb. And as they say on the front of their website, they've got 34,000 cities, 190 countries in which they operate. They don't run a single hotel or own a single bed. They just have created or helped in this share economy. People who have a spare bed and people who are looking for a bed, and cool, you can work out what that's going to cost or arrange it free, and away you go. That's a transformation in this world. The speed of that is phenomenal, and it requires innovative thinking. The biggest provider of taxi services is not the Melbourne taxi fleet in the world today. The biggest provider of taxi services is Uber, and they don't run a single car or own a single fleet. They have, again, capitalized in on being the interface between people who need a ride and people who can offer a ride, and many other services as well now that they have moved into, and that's been done in a very short period of time. The biggest retailer in the world today is not Walmart, and it's not Woolies or Coles, but it is, of course, eBay, and they don't own a single item of merchandise or run a single store. They just create who were the buyers to now become sellers. They create the space for everyone to set up a store. It's an eBay environment, and that change has taken place very quickly. The biggest provider of knowledge and information in the world today is no longer Encyclopedia Britannica. Even though they were founded in 1768 and for more than 2 centuries had that dominant brand, it's of course a world of Wikipedia. Now, it's not only the shift from the print to the digital, from the volumes of old to the online, but it's a shift to how it's accessed, freely available. It's put together not by people who are paid to write the articles, but by the web community. I was looking online recently. I was on the App Store. I thought, does Encyclopedia Britannica still exist? I thought, my kids have got tablets now. They're at the point, it could be useful. I went online. There is an Encyclopedia Britannica app. And it's got digital tools now. It's got a video and others, not just the print form online. So it's, it looked like a good interaction. But there I was, and the full edition, Encyclopedia Britannica 2015, was available on the App Store for $14.39. And I remember when my dad paid $2,000, when the knock at the door came through, 24 volumes, and that was impressive, and it sat there gathering dust for a decade or two. Well, there we are, $14.39 I think was the price, and I looked at it, I thought, that's not worth it, I'm not going to buy it. And I didn't. And that's just the world of today. So I think as people in our community, we have the opportunity to observe these shifts and respond in these new ways. It does require different thinking. The smartphone was never going to come out of Nokia because it requires thinking about a phone not just as a phone. It requires thinking about a phone without buttons and thinking about a phone where the style matters and where it's not ultimately just about making the call. It requires different thinking. The tablet didn't come out of IBM because it, again, was a computer without keyboards. It requires different thinking, innovative thinking, relevant at this conference with such a name. We've got to, in this post-linear world, see how quickly things change and think innovatively and responsively. Secondly, it's a post-literate world. And so by that I mean that it's not just the words alone that influence. Now, we're people of the Word, but the Word that became flesh and dwelt among us, we've got the Word of God, of course, that is the basis for our life. And we've got to think in a post-literate world how we can effectively communicate that. Because we are in a world now not of pen and paper, but of glass. Glass has become the new medium. Now, the previous medium that was transformed for mass communication and portability purposes was paper. When it was transformed into book form in 1439, when Johannes Gutenberg came up with the printing press, and suddenly paper, which of course had been around for millennia, was useful because now you could mass print and you could carry it, it was portable, you could pass around, deliver brochures and pamphlets. 1439, we've had to wait 600 years for a new medium to become transformed to be mass and portable and transportable, and it's glass. Glass in our era, in this very decade, has been that next medium that has been transformed. And it's glass that we carry in our pockets or under our arm. It's glass that we wear on our wrist or wear on our face. It's glass that is not something you look through, it's something you look at. It's designed to display content. It's going to be on the first car, on the windscreen of the head-up display of the first car Gen Z learned to drive on. It is glass that has become transformed to display content, and it's not written, but it's visual and video-based content. Now, I was talking about the million apps available. I thought I'd find out what Australians are downloading. What's our number one app? Thinking maybe it was a productivity tool. In the last 12 months, has it been a learning tool, maybe a social connectivity tool? But unfortunately for our nation, the most downloaded app by Australians last year was Candy Crush. So, but I do have hope that we'll start to use them for more productive purposes into the future. The transformation has taken place even from the youngest years. We all grew up in classrooms where the ABCs were on the wall, and A was for apple and B for bumblebee, and it was visual, but in a written or printed form. Now, these children from the youngest age, of course, have these devices. It's kinesthetic, it's lean-forward screens, it's interaction, it's multi-screening, and they are a few clicks away from that information, and they drive the content. The ABCs today are these digital brands that look different to how the ABCs of the past did. In fact, I thought I'd just test you on the ABCs of the 21st century, at least some of them. Let's start here with A for Angry Birds, very good, and B for, I heard someone say blogger, well done, and C for Chrome, and D for, and E for Evernote, very good, and F for Facebook, good, and G for Google Maps, excellent. So you're up with the 21st century brands. Hardly any letters, it's just symbols, it's just images, and yet we know what companies are behind them. That's the power of change. I was looking at symbols recently and recognizing that the symbols today drive us. We don't need words. On the device, it doesn't have P-L-A-Y written there because the triangle tells the story. And when the technologists invent new technologies, they have to invent new symbols to describe what's taking place, new symbols that don't have words. because these devices cut across language barriers and countries and cultures and generations. And my little 4-year-old can navigate his way through, iPads and apps and the like without yet being able to read, because he can read the icons and the symbols. And it's true not just in technology, you see it in real estate, you see it in so many areas, the rise of the symbol. And in the church we have the greatest symbols of the cross and of communion, and stories that can cut to the very core, the parables of Jesus and stories of the Word from the Old Testament to the New. Amazing stories that can connect with the visual era of today. I grabbed this real estate ad from the inner west of Sydney. I'm not sure if it's taking place here, but only in the inner west of our cities now are people bragging about 1.5 car spaces. I'm still trying to work out how useful that extra half a car space is, but real estate's going a bit crazy. I was coming through Singapore a year ago, and if you've been there, they put up lots of rules and lots of symbols, what's not allowed, no chewing gum and no spitting and the like. And they've added to the signboard recently, which I thought was quite interesting. So that's just how it is. When it comes to processing information, people can process a symbol more quickly than they can the written word. And so again, the power of symbols is there. I looked up the most universally recognized symbols in our world, the most universally recognized, whether they be brands or symbols. Now, what might you think is the most recognized symbol in the world today? McDonald's. You're right. It depends on the list. I looked at about 5 studies, and it was either this one at number 1 or it was this one at number 1. Isn't that amazing in this world? This one was always in the top 10, such as the influence of the Olympics. Even in countries that don't use dollars, this was always in the top 10 of all of the surveys that we looked at. This one universally is in the top 10, and I was wondering, does the cross make it into the top 10 of these lists? Well, this cross made it, but not this cross. And that's a challenge, isn't it? So in this world of symbols, we've got the most powerful, transformative symbol that can change lives and communities, that is so relevant and is the hope of the world. Thirdly, in addition to being post-linear and post-literate, it's a world that is post-logical. And by this I mean, we can't just connect with providing more knowledge and information and data. We've got to connect here and not just here. IBM put out their big data study. Here's what they said. There's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day. That's a big number. But they go on to say that 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone. We are in information overload, more content provided than ever before. And if we want to communicate, we can't just add more content, more knowledge, because that is just going to be pushed to the side. We've got to connect in a way that gets beyond that. Australians already have a little bit of knowledge, but sometimes the knowledge is a bit vague. Knowledge about Christianity, but that might be waning a little bit. But they need a real example of Christianity to lead them through the process. We surveyed Australians asking them, because we know that Australians are good with Christianity and fine with Jesus, but we wanted to check the details. Okay, we asked them this question. In which century did Jesus live? And it was a multi-choice question, a national representative sample of Australians. 42% said, well, he lived in the 1st century AD, so correct and well done on the 42%. I was worried about 28% that had no idea, and again, there were only, I think, 4 or 5 options. Probably I was the most worried, though, about the 27% who said that Jesus lived in ancient times before Christ. And just trying to get my head around even the logic of that, not just biblical illiteracy, but some historical illiteracy, but that's how I guess it is. So we've got to help Australians not just get more facts and knowledge, help them see it not with the eyes of their head, help them see the gospel, see Christ, and see the transformation he brings to lives with the eyes of the heart. And it is a world that is looking with the eyes of their heart. They're looking for answers. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for, as I said here, for things like hope and for truth and for meaning, for purpose, and of course for love. Jesus was the one who used this metaphor about the eyes of the head and the eyes of the heart. And he says, those seeing they don't see, and they're hearing they don't hear or understand. So we've got to find a way to remove those blocks and pray for this nation and be an example of this nation and not add to the blocks that are causing the deafness of the hearing and the blindness of the eyes, but open those up Blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. And it's the ears, not these ones, and the eyes, not these ones that Jesus was talking about, but the ones of the heart. And that happens when Christians are authentic in their engagement and effective in their communication, and utilizing the tools and the technologies and the basics of today to get cut through in a world of information overload. So let me conclude with 4 final words to keep in mind that might be useful as some takeaways for us. If we are to effectively engage with our culture, if we are effectively to communicate in our communities, then there are 4 R's to keep in mind. Now, there used to be 3 R's of education, and 2 of them weren't even R's, so that didn't work for me. But I thought I would conclude with 4 genuine R's, and the first is we've got to keep it real. We've got to keep it authentic and transparent so that we can cut against that label of hypocrisy that is badged on the church. It is about the transparency, it is about the vulnerability, and it is about just knowing that we don't have the answers, we just are a witness of the truth. We weren't called to be the answer givers or the debate winners, but simply be my witnesses, said our Lord. Wherever you go, tell the story, what I have done in your life. And so that's the testimony we bring, that's all we bring. There was a guy it was Safety at Work Week a few months ago, and this guy was diligent to get his safety message out to his staff, but unfortunately the message didn't quite match up with his approach. I mean, it was a nice idea, but unfortunately the walk did not match the talk, and that's just a bad example all around, and that's not keeping it real. Secondly, we've got to keep it relevant. What we say and how we say it has to get cut through in these times of change. That sometimes means adapting, adjusting, responding, innovating. And that's hopefully key to what we do. There's been a safety message at waterways in the US for some time. They've had lots of these signs up, which I saw was quite interesting. They put this sign up, if you see someone drowning. And in the middle, that is supposed to be a stick figure of someone with their arms raised saying, help, help, you know. But that's not how we read it. I mean, that's lol. And I mean, to LOL, I mean, to laugh out loud, that is not the right response when someone is having a tough time out there in the water. It needs some upgrading. It's no longer relevant. The times have swept over it and pushed it to the margins of relevance. Which brings me to this third one, therefore. We need to be responsive and adjusting and adaptive to the times. We're all in a non-stop quest for relevance. We've got to innovate and adjust to be relevant. I know you've got Luna Park here. I'm not sure if you've got sort of a Coney Island there. In the Sydney Luna Park, there's Coney Island, and it's got sort of some of the old-time rides still there. And one that I remember from being a kid, and I was there recently, they've still got it, these little sort of raised merry-go-rounds. They just spin around, and I think they call it King of the Castle or something, and the goal is to sort of get onto it. But as it spins, the centripetal force sort of is constantly pushing you to the side. And so it's hard to remain in the center of this thing as it spins around. And that centripetal force is a lot like the force of change. It's constantly there pushing us to the margin, constantly and every day. And if we don't respond to it, if we hit that change fatigue point and become immune to the change around us, to the changing environment, we will find ourselves on the margins very quickly without even realizing it. Such is the centripetal force of change. It is about responding to the change. I saw an Aussie guy came up with an invention recently. Since the GFC, a lot more Australians have been bringing their lunch to work, just to save money. It's a great thing. But the consequence of that is that lunchtime fridges are getting more and more full with stuff. Someone will bring a loaf of bread and margarine and cheese, and others sometimes forget their lunch. They think, oh, there's a loaf here. I'll grab a couple of slices, a bit of cheese here and a bit of margarine there. Well, that's also fine, but it does irritate some people. So this guy has invented an anti-theft lunch bag, which is a pretty cool idea. He gets these Ziploc bags, and he screen prints black paint on the outside of them, and you put your lunch in and you can see the result. It does the trick. No one is going to mess with your lunch when it's in the anti-theft lunch bag. So not a bad solution to a new problem, a responsive idea to an emerging issue. We've got to respond likewise. Keep it real, keep it relevant, keep it responsive, and finally, keep it relational. Always has been and will be key to the gospel. When you read Peter's sermon in Acts 2, they're all gathered, people from all around the known world. It's the day of Pentecost, and they're responding, and Peter is preaching, and he's connecting, analytically, logically, historically. He's connecting with the culture. He's quoting Joel, he's quoting David, he's quoting the history that they know and knew. And then he talks about recent events. If you read his sermon sometime, it's a great one. I'm sure we know it. and he starts talking about, what you have done to Jesus, who was the Messiah, and the result of this. Because he's speaking to the head, and they're understanding, they're getting it. But he's also speaking to the heart. And they are what? They are cut to the heart and respond and say, brothers, what should we do? And he says, repent and be baptized in the name of Jesus. And they respond. 3,000 added to their number that day. An amazing response, head and heart engaged. It was relational and it was rational. It was truth, but communicated through relevance. And they responded, and so many were saved. I think in times of social media, this relational aspect is just unexpected, even more than ever. I saw a guy, though, that perhaps took social media a bit too literally with this effort. Be the first of your friends to like this post. And I thought that was good Aussie humour there, perhaps. Let me conclude with a verse from Psalm 78, perhaps as a takeaway for us all and the ongoing mission that we are part of. Let me point out that I'll save these slides from both sessions. They'll be available to you, so feel free to access those. Now he tells me I've written notes all the time. But some were taking photos. That's the cool thing. You're up with it anyway, but I'll get you those digital copies if that is of use. So let me conclude with some words from Psalm 78. Quite a long psalm in the Psalter, because it just tracks the roller coaster ride of Israel's existence. They're full on for God, and then they're falling away, and then they're back and they repent, and then they wander away. They said they never would, and they did. And you think, what's wrong with these people? And then you realize, I'm not looking into some historical thing. I'm looking in a mirror, because this is not just their heart. This is my heart, and we need this ongoing forgiveness and redemption that Christ alone offers. Let me just read a few verses, though, of the timeless message that was their mandate and ours as well. As the psalmist says, what we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us, we will not hide from our children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done, so that the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn will tell their children. And then they will put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands all their days. We're just the next series of generations in that long lineup that's gone 4 generations, and after us will go 4 more generations. But for such a time as this, and a place as this, for a generation as this, and an opportunity as this, may we do it effectively as we should, and may God bless us as we do it. Thanks for listening.